welcome back once again to the Imaginary Gallery. This is TJ, your host, and we are discussing the different types of abusive people, and we are referencing Lundy Bancroft's beautiful book, Why Does He or She Do That? Inside the Minds of Angry and Controlling People. We are now on the fifth in the list of different types of abusive persons. This one is called Mr. or Mrs. Sensitive. Mr. or Mrs. Sensitive seems to be the diametric opposite of the drill sergeant we just discussed. This type of creature is soft-spoken, gentle, very supportive, when it's not being abusive, of course. Mr. or Mrs. Sensitive loves the language of feelings, openly sharing his or her insecurities, fears, and previous emotional injuries. If it's a man, he hugs other men. If it's a lady, she hugs other ladies. It may speak out about the absurdity of war or the need for men to get in touch with their feminine side. Perhaps it attends a men's or women's group and goes on men's or women's retreats. Many times it has participated extensively in therapy and or in 12-step programs. This type of creature may also read the big self-help books, so he or she speaks the language of popular psychology and introspection. This creature's vocabulary is sprinkled with jargon such as working out our issues, developing closeness, facing up to hard things about myself. This type of creature presents itself to the potential dating partner as an ally in the struggle against sex role limitations. Now, to some partners, this seems like a dream come true. So, what's the matter with this picture? There's nothing obvious yet, is there? But this is exactly the problem, which I can attest is true from my own experience. Mr. or Mrs. Sensitive wraps itself in one of the most persuasive covers any kind of creature can have. If you start to feel chronically mistreated by this creature, you're likely to assume that something is wrong with you. And if you complain about this type of creature to other people, they will probably think you are spoiled. You've got the new age chick. You've got the new age man. What more do you want? They may say. The following dynamics are typical of a relationship with a Mr. or Mrs. Sensitive and may help explain your feeling that something's gone wrong. Number one, you seem to be hurting this other person's feelings all the time, even though you don't really know why. And this creature expects your attention to be focused endlessly on its emotional injuries. If you happen to be in a bad mood at one particular time, and you say something that's insensitive or doesn't sound fair, it won't be enough for you to give a sincere apology later or to try to accept responsibility. This creature will go on and on about it, expecting you to grovel as if you had treated this person with profound cruelty. Mr. Bancroft tells us to notice the twist here. This is just what an abuser accuses the partner of doing to it, when all the partner's really doing or looking for is a heartfelt, "I'm sorry." Number two, when your feelings are hurt. On the other hand, this type of creature will insist on brushing over it very rapidly. It may give you a stream of pop psychology language.
Oh, just let the feelings go through you.
Don't hold on to those feelings so much.
It's all in the attitude that you take towards your life.
Or,
nobody can ever hurt you unless you let them.
To substitute for genuine support for your actual feelings, especially if you are upset about something that it did. None of these philosophies apply when you upset this creature, however. Number 3, with the passage of time, this type of creature increasingly casts blame onto you for anything he or she is dissatisfied with in its own life. Your burden of guilt continues to grow and grow. Number 4, it starts to exhibit a mean side that nobody else ever gets to see. And this mean side may eventually become intimidating or threatening. This creature we're discussing has the potential to turn physically frightening, as any type of abusive person may, no matter how much it may preach nonviolence. After an aggressive or assaultive incident, many times these types of creatures will speak of the actions it did as anger rather than abuse, which is what it is, as though there were no difference between the two, anger and abuse. It blames its assaultive behavior on you and his or her emotional issues, saying that his or her feelings were so deeply wounded it had no other choice than to do whatever it did, which is sick and wrong. A lot of people reject the possibility that this sensitive creature could be an abusive person. Lundy himself ran into this disbelief on one particular weekend when he was doing a training course about emotional recovery, as he does on occasion. He's got workshops that focus partly on healing effects of crying, and so tend to be attended by more ladies than guys. The males who do show up have included many of the most wonderful men it has been his good fortune to know, as well as a handful of the biggest manipulators. Years ago, a participant named Deanna approached him anxiously prior to the beginning of a workshop. She stated that her ex-partner named Brad called her a few days ahead of the workshop to tell her that he happened to be attending the very same weekend. She was not very comfortable and told him that if he showed up, she was going to leave. He promised not to bother her and said he would not bring up their relationship in any kind of way. He was coming with his new girlfriend, which eased Deanna's worries. Lundy says he spent some time talking with Brad as the workshop was beginning, without mentioning Deanna. Brad seemed to be a likable guy. He was kind. What can you say? He was sensitive. However, Lundy observed within a few hours that Brad was in fact speaking to other people about his past with Deanna and getting them all riled up about her running away from their unresolved issues. On Sunday morning, finally he provoked a scene about the relationship right in front of the entire workshop, which was humiliating to Deanna. This story does not end at this point. Lundy called for a break, and took Brad to the side and said, "Look, Brad, it was my understanding you've agreed not to raise up these issues, and that it had become obvious that he had come for the weekend with the intention of doing precisely what he promised that he would not do." Lundy went on to point out that he had taken Deanna's weekend away from her and that he considered this kind of power move to be a move of abuse, especially since it was directed at Deanna, the ex-partner. Saying the word abuse to an abusive person can be like lighting a tinderbox. When you name the unmentionable secret, it will go wild. Brad became loud, rolled his eyes at what a hysterical exaggerator he considered Lundy to be, and adapted a victim stance, saying,
I beg you to stop this.
Then came the most important part. He said, in a screeching whine,
I have only put my hand on a partner once in my entire life, many, many years ago, and I just barely pushed her away from me like this.
and He shoved Lundy hard by the shoulder.
After she called my mother a sick woman.
Why was Brad denying a history of assault while actually admitting to a history of assault when Lundy hadn't even said anything about violence? The possibility that he might be physically abusive had never occurred to Lundy before, but it certainly did at this point. The signs were all there. The bullying of his Deanna and then insisting it was for her own good. Feeling entitled to ignore an agreement that he had made that was very important. Blaming an earlier girlfriend for the assault of her and minimizing it. The strength of the shove he gave would have shaken up most ladies. Lundy now doubted that the assaultive incident he had described was his only occasion of being physically aggressive or intimidating to a lady. Now at this point, he required Brad to leave the workshop. Then he had to deal with a mini insurrection from some other workshop participants who couldn't believe that he was ejecting this gentle, sweet man who was so in touch with his feelings. He cries, after all. How could he be abusive? This gentle man style of abuser tends to be highly self-centered and demanding of emotional catering. He may not be the man who has a fit because dinner's late. Instead, he would erupt because some way the partner failed to sacrifice his or her own needs or interests to keep him content. He plays up how fragile he is to divert attention away from the fact he's got a huge trail of destruction behind him. In the box, Lundy states, the central attitudes driving Mr. or Mrs. Sensitive are,
I'm against macho men, so there's no way I could be abusive.
As long as I use a bit of psychobabble, nobody's gonna believe that I'm mistreating you.
I can control you by analyzing how your mind and your emotions work and what your issues are from your childhood. I can get right inside of your head whether you want me to or not.
Nothing in this world is more important than my feelings.
Women should be grateful to me for not being like those other men. I am the narcopath. This is a special message for one sweet little girl out there. Hi, you remember me? Take a closer look. You remember me? Think back to high school.
You were the only girl on the cheerleading squad that had a kinky boyfriend? Well, honey, here's looking at you. I know that you thought it was weird that I like to play with toys and put them in my bottom. Well, honey, I've got a pussy willow now, so I don't need the bottom anymore, but it works too.
As you can probably see, I've changed a little since you last saw me. I know I was supposed to be your high school sweetheart. What a shame that turned out to be, and what a disgrace.
And as far as my obsession with inserting things into my part, I'm sorry if that embarrassed you. In fact, I'm sure you were probably humiliated when we had to go to the hospital because that little toy got stuck up in there. And you know, I really don't want to hear about how heartbroken you were when you decided to become a detective and found out for certain that I was having sex with one of your good friends. Well, honey, that's your own fault. I told you, do not check up on me. Do not spy on me. Do not go looking for anything on me. And what did you do? You started snooping. The fact that your heart's broken, that ain't my problem. You didn't follow my rules. If you would have never looked into all that stuff like the nosy mouse you are, well then you wouldn't know any of this and we'd probably be married by now. You had to go and be Mr. Sleuth and check up on me and look into things. Well, you have nobody to blame but yourself for your broken heart. Take your goddamn broken heart and eat it. Eat it.